They say don't mess with quiet people. I guess Cynthia didn't get the memo. I was just trying to live my life out here in peace. Little cabin, tools where I need them, no one bothering me. Then one day I look out and there's a golf cart plugged into my outlet like it pays rent. That was the beginning. What followed? Honestly, it got a little electric. You tell me, did I go too far or not nearly far enough? Leave a comment and let me know. And hey, if this kind of madness feels familiar, stick around. This is QA Stories, and things are just getting started. This place is what you might call golf cart heaven, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Everyone, and I mean everyone, drives these little electric carts to get around the community. Need to go to the clubhouse for the weekly poker game? Golf cart. Heading to the mailbox to check if your Social Security payment arrived? Golf cart. Want to visit your neighbor 3 houses down to borrow a cup of sugar? You guessed it, golf cart. My cabin sits right where I like it, in the back corner of the development, nice and private with plenty of space between me and the nearest neighbor. I've got this outdoor outlet that I use for my tools and equipment when I'm working on projects around the house. Nothing fancy, just a standard electrical connection that makes my life easier. Maybe I was naive thinking HOA rules would protect my peace. The community itself is pretty standard HOA stuff, a place where even mailbox colors need approval. One neighbor got fined for a flag that was 2 inches too wide. Not kidding. Some of the rules make perfect sense. Nobody wants to live next to a house that looks like a junkyard. Others, well, let's just say some people have way too much time on their hands and a burning need to control what their neighbors do on their own property. But I follow all the rules because I just want to live peacefully and avoid drama. Recently, I'd installed a deer deterrent system around my garden because those damn critters kept destroying my tomatoes, eating everything I'd worked so hard to grow. It's the same standard setup I install for clients all the time. Nothing fancy, nothing dangerous, just enough juice to make animals think twice about trespassing. I honestly thought I'd found my little slice of paradise here. Quiet neighbors, beautiful scenery, and enough space to work on my projects without bothering anyone or having anyone bother me. The irony is that I'd specifically chosen this corner lot because it seemed so peaceful and isolated from potential neighbor conflicts. I should have known it wouldn't last. There's always someone who has to ruin a good thing, isn't there? So there I was, last Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, getting ready for a job installation, when I noticed something weird outside my window. My stomach sank a little. Not disaster, but definitely not good. I'm standing there in my kitchen, looking out at my perfectly organized outdoor workspace, when something just looked wrong. There was this charging cable that definitely wasn't mine, running from somewhere near my house to what looked like a golf cart parked just close enough to reach my outdoor outlet. Wait a minute, I thought to myself. That charging cable isn't mine. I walked over to my outdoor outlet and sure enough, there's a golf cart charging cable plugged into my electricity, using my power, like whoever did it owned the place. My first thought was that maybe someone made an honest mistake, right? I almost laughed. Maybe this was just a lazy mistake, right? These HOA communities can be confusing sometimes, especially when you're new or visiting someone. Property lines aren't always crystal clear, what with all these little pathways and shared spaces that make everything blend together. Maybe someone was having an emergency with their golf cart battery and just grabbed the nearest outlet without thinking about whose property it was on. But something about the whole setup felt off, you know? The cable wasn't just casually draped over to my outlet like someone in a hurry might do. It was positioned very deliberately, like whoever did it had taken their time to make sure everything was connected properly and securely. I've got a decent security camera system installed around my property. It comes with the territory when you work with expensive electrical equipment and can't afford to have tools walking off job sites. These cameras have saved my butt more than once when equipment went missing from work locations, so I figured they might help me understand what was going on here. I pulled up the security camera footage on my phone and rewound it to see who'd been using my electricity without permission. I had to replay the footage 3 times before I believed what I was seeing, because it was just so brazen and deliberate that I couldn't wrap my head around it. There she was, clear as day on my security system, Cynthia Doyle. I knew her by reputation around the community, former real estate agent, been on the HOA board for what felt like forever, one of those people who always has strong opinions about everything and isn't shy about sharing those opinions with anyone within earshot. But watching this footage, she wasn't acting lost or confused like someone who'd made an innocent mistake. She pulled up in her golf cart, looked around like she was checking for witnesses, which should have been my first red flag, and then plugged into my outlet like she'd done this a dozen times before, like my outlet came with her name on it. Zero hesitation, no uncertainty, no "I hope this is okay" body language, just pure confidence and entitlement. Look, I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially in a community like this where we all have to live together and get along. Maybe she was having some kind of emergency with her golf cart battery and my outlet was the closest one available. Maybe she genuinely didn't realize it was my electricity she was using and figured it was some kind of community resource. So I decided to handle it the polite way first. I unplugged her charging cable and left what I thought was a perfectly reasonable note. "Hi, this outlet belongs to my property. Please ask before using. Thanks, Nate." Simple, direct, polite, and giving her an easy way to make things right if this was all just a misunderstanding. But something about her body language on that camera footage kept bothering me, nagging at the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. She'd looked too confident, too practiced, too entitled, like this wasn't her first rodeo with other people's property. I tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding, that I was reading too much into a perfectly innocent situation. I stood there for a minute, note in hand, wondering if but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just fired the first shot in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. 3 days later, I'm working in my garage on some equipment maintenance when I hear the familiar hum of an electric golf cart outside my house. I've tuned out golf carts like birdsong by now, until this one made me look. Something made me look up from what I was doing, maybe some subconscious recognition of the engine sound, and I decided to peek through my window to see what was going on. And there she was again, Cynthia Doyle, rolling up to my outlet like she pays my electric bill every month. This time I didn't bother waiting for camera footage to see what had happened after the fact. I wanted to watch this unfold in real time and see exactly how brazen she was planning to be about this whole situation. I positioned myself at my garage window where I could see everything clearly without being too obvious about watching her. She definitely saw my polite note from a few days earlier. I watched her pick it up off the ground where I'd left it, read through it carefully, and then maybe she didn't see the note. Maybe it blew away? No, she saw it. The sound of that paper crumpling, louder than it should have been. She crumpled it up and tossed it into her little cart basket like it was nothing more than unwanted junk mail. Are you kidding me right now? I actually said that out loud to myself as I watched this unfold. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking, in the worst possible way. This wasn't confusion or an emergency or some kind of innocent misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, calculated middle finger to my reasonable request for basic courtesy and respect. She'd read my note, understood exactly what I was asking for, and decided that my feelings and property rights simply didn't matter to her. The message was crystal clear. I don't care what you think, and I'm going to do whatever I want regardless of how you feel about it. Apparently, neighborly courtesy doesn't apply to self-declared HOA royalty. But here's where the whole situation got really interesting. And by interesting, I mean infuriating in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about human decency. About halfway through her charging session, I noticed Cynthia doing something really strange that caught my attention and made me lean closer to the window to get a better view. Instead of running her charging cable straight from her golf cart to my outlet like any normal person would do, she started rerouting the whole setup. I watched in disbelief as she threaded the cable behind some bushes, looped it around my fence posts, and basically tried to camouflage the fact that she was stealing my electricity. She was hiding it. Not borrowing, not asking, hiding. She was putting real effort into concealing her theft, which meant she absolutely knew it was wrong, but was doing it anyway, while trying to hide the evidence. So she knows it's wrong, but she's doing it anyway. and now she's trying to hide it from anyone who might notice what she's up to. This wasn't some clueless neighbor making an innocent mistake anymore. This was calculated theft, with a deliberate cover-up attempt, designed to avoid getting caught or confronted about her behavior. She was investing significant time and energy into concealing her crime, which proved beyond any doubt that she understood exactly what she was doing and knew it was completely unacceptable. The fact that she was trying to be sneaky about the whole thing somehow made it 10 times worse than if she'd just brazenly plugged in and owned her decision to steal from me. It felt insulting on a level I hadn't expected, like she thought I was either too stupid to notice someone rearranging cables around my own property, or too weak and passive to do anything about it even if I did notice. You know what really got under my skin about this whole situation? It wasn't even the money. We're talking about maybe a few dollars worth of electricity at most. What bothered me was the sheer disrespect of it all. The casual assumption that I was either too dumb to notice or too much of a pushover to stand up for myself. I mean, I install electrical systems for a living, for crying out loud. I notice when cables are where they shouldn't be because observing electrical setups is literally what I do for work every single day. But beyond my professional expertise, this was about basic human respect and the principle of treating your neighbors like they matter. This woman had looked at my polite note, my reasonable request for basic courtesy, and decided that I wasn't worth respecting as a human being. She'd figured she could just steamroll right over me because I seemed like a nice, quiet guy who wouldn't cause trouble or fight back when pushed around. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was insulted. Well, maybe it was time to show her that being nice doesn't automatically mean being a pushover, and that quiet people can be the most dangerous when you finally manage to push them too far. That night, I found myself looking over the electrical layout around my cabin, which is something I do out of professional habit anyway. I always know where every wire goes and what it connects to. I've got my deer deterrent system that I installed last month after those damn deer ate half my vegetable garden, destroying weeks of work and planning in a single night. It's a standard wildlife control setup, the same thing I install for clients who want to protect their gardens and landscaping from animal damage. And that's when the idea started forming in my mind like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. A perfectly legal, completely justified solution to my trespassing problem that would teach Cynthia about boundaries in the most direct way possible. Maybe it was time I stopped being polite. Maybe, staring at that electrical diagram, I realized I had two choices ahead of me. Let Cynthia keep walking all over me like a doormat, accepting that some people will just take advantage of anyone who seems nice and accommodating, or teach her a lesson about boundaries and consequences that she'd never forget. The question was, which kind of man was I going to be when push came to shove? Here's the thing about being an electrical contractor that most people don't understand. You learn to do everything safely and legally, because one mistake can ruin your reputation, your business, and potentially hurt someone in ways you never intended. I wasn't about to rig some Home Alone trap, tempting as that was. What I had in mind was a lot simpler, more elegant, and completely legitimate from both a legal and safety standpoint. My deer deterrent system puts out what we call a pulse fence in the industry. It's the exact same technology that farmers have used for decades to keep livestock in pastures and predators away from their animals. The voltage is high enough to get your attention and make you think twice about what you're doing, but the amperage is so low it couldn't power a small LED nightlight for more than a few seconds. It's like a handshake from a 9-volt battery. Polite, but unforgettable. I'd literally installed this exact same system for dozens of clients over the years who wanted to keep deer, raccoons, and other unwanted visitors away from their property and gardens. It's completely legal in every state I've worked in, totally safe when installed correctly, and 100% effective at teaching boundaries to anything that doesn't belong in a particular area. The setup I had in mind was remarkably straightforward from a technical perspective. I just needed to connect my outdoor outlet to the existing fence system that was already installed and functioning around my garden. One simple wire connection using standard electrical components, and anyone who tried to grab that outlet without permission would get a harmless but memorable reminder about respecting other people's property rights. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense, it was education delivered in the most direct and effective way possible. I spent the next morning watching through my window like a kid waiting for Christmas morning, except instead of presents, I was waiting to see if my entitled neighbor would try to steal my electricity again. Every golf cart sound that echoed through the community made my heart race a little bit, wondering if this would be the moment when Cynthia learned that actions have consequences. Wouldn't it be nice if she'd gotten the message? Part of me genuinely hoped she wouldn't come back, that maybe she'd found someone else's electricity to steal, or better yet, decided to just pay for her own power like every other normal person in the world does. But around 10 o'clock in the morning, I spotted her distinctive golf cart coming down the path with that same entitled confidence as before, like she owned the entire community and everyone in it existed solely for her convenience. She parked in almost exactly the same spot as her previous visits, looked around carefully to make sure no one was watching. Little did she know that someone definitely was, and started her elaborate cable hiding routine again. I watched her thread the charging cable behind the bushes and loop it around my fence posts like some kind of electrical ninja trying to cover her tracks. Come on, Cynthia, I thought to myself as I watched her finish her cable camouflage routine. Just a little bit closer to that outlet and you'll get the education you've been asking for. She finished her elaborate concealment efforts and walked confidently toward my outlet with the charging cable in her hand, moving with the kind of casual arrogance that suggested she'd never faced real consequences for her behavior in her entire life. No hesitation, no second thoughts, no moment of conscience about what she was doing, just pure, unadulterated entitlement, walking straight toward a lesson in boundaries. Cynthia reached down, grabbed the outlet cover, and zap! The shriek she let out, high-pitched, offended, and almost operatic. She jerked backward so fast she nearly fell over, dropping the charging cable and stumbling backward into her golf cart while shaking her hand frantically. I almost dropped my coffee. "What the hell?" she yelled, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear, shaking her hand and looking around wildly like she'd been attacked by some invisible enemy or supernatural force. The deer fence had done exactly what it was designed to do, delivering one quick, harmless pulse that communicated, "Hey, this isn't yours," in the most direct way possible, without causing any actual harm or injury. Cynthia stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring at my outlet like it had personally betrayed her trust and violated some unspoken agreement they'd had. I watched her face go through this amazing progression of emotions in real time. Confusion, then anger, then genuine fear of touching anything else around my property. She kept shaking her hand and muttering under her breath, probably wondering if she was having some kind of medical episode or if my outlet had been possessed by electrical demons. I'll be honest with you, I laughed when it happened. Not a mean, vindictive laugh like some cartoon villain, but definitely a satisfied chuckle of someone who just watched justice being served in the most appropriate way possible. But I also felt complicated about the whole thing, if I'm being completely honest. This wasn't some cartoon where the villain gets an anvil dropped on their head and bounces back for the next scene. This was a real person who just learned a real lesson about boundaries in a way that probably scared the hell out of her. I wasn't sure if I was proud, but I was definitely satisfied. She'd pushed and pushed, ignored every polite attempt at communication, and now she'd discovered that actions have consequences when you mess with the wrong person. Sometimes you have to speak a language that people can understand, and apparently the only language Cynthia understood was the direct application of natural consequences for her behavior. Watching Cynthia drive away in a furious huff, shaking her hand and muttering angrily to herself, I felt this strange mix of satisfaction and dread washing over me. The satisfaction part was obvious. She'd finally learned that she couldn't just walk all over me and take whatever she wanted without facing any pushback. But the dread, well, if there's one thing I've learned about entitled people over the years, it's that they never go down quietly when someone finally stands up to them. But I knew that wasn't the end. Not with someone like her. The real question wasn't whether my little electrical lesson had solved the immediate problem. It was what Cynthia was planning to do about being humiliated and challenged, in a way she'd probably never experienced before. 2 hours later, my phone rang with one of those unknown local numbers that immediately makes your stomach drop because you know it's probably not good news. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring, and I immediately regretted that decision. There's a unique kind of anxiety that hits when an HOA board member uses the phrase "serious incident report." It's the sound of bureaucratic doom wrapped in passive-aggressive silk. "Mr. Harper, this is Peterson, HOA board president. I need to discuss a serious incident report we received this morning regarding your property and some kind of dangerous electrical situation that apparently injured one of our residents. My stomach dropped even further as I realized that Cynthia hadn't just accepted her lesson and moved on with her life. She'd gone straight to the authorities to spin her own version of events. "What kind of incident, Mr. Peterson?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and reasonable, even though I could feel my blood pressure starting to rise again. "A resident reported being injured by some kind of electrical device on your property." Peterson continued in that official, no-nonsense tone that HOA board members love to use when they think they're dealing with a problem resident. "He claims you've installed a dangerous shock system without proper permits or warning signs, and that she was injured when she accidentally came into contact with it while walking past your house." Wait, what? Injured? Serious injury from brushing past an outlet? That's like saying you got frostbite from looking at a snow globe. Mr. Peterson, I think there might be some serious confusion here about what actually happened. I have a standard wildlife deterrent system around my garden. It's the same thing that people all over the country use to keep deer and rabbits from destroying their landscaping. It's completely legal, totally safe, and specifically designed not to cause injury to people or animals. Before Peterson arrived at my house, he filled me in on the details of Cynthia's official complaint, and let me tell you, her version of events was a masterpiece of creative fiction. According to her carefully crafted narrative, she was simply walking past my property when she accidentally brushed against my electrical outlet and received a violent shock that could have caused serious injury or even death to an elderly person. She didn't just rewrite the story, she rewrote herself into a fragile victim of electrical terrorism. There was absolutely no mention of the golf cart in her story, no mention of the charging cable that she'd brought specifically to steal my electricity, no mention of the multiple previous incidents where she deliberately trespassed on my property to use my power without permission. You know, I've heard stories like this before on drama channels, people who get caught doing something wrong and then immediately flip the script to make themselves look like the victim instead of the perpetrator. But experiencing this kind of gaslighting firsthand, that's a whole different level of frustrating that's hard to describe unless you've been through it yourself. When Peterson showed up at my house that afternoon, he was all business and professional courtesy. He's a former high school physics teacher who retired a few years ago and now takes his HOA board duties very seriously, approaching everything with methodical thoroughness. He had the kind of demeanor that made you feel like you were about to fail a pop quiz on property lines. "Show me this electrical system you have installed," he said, pulling out a small notebook and pen like he was documenting evidence for a potential legal case. I walked him around my property, explaining the wildlife deterrent setup in detail and emphasizing the safety features and legal compliance of the entire system. "It's the same voltage and amperage as a standard electric fence that farmers have been using for over a century to manage livestock and protect crops," I explained patiently. "Ranchers and farmers all across the country use this exact same technology every single day to keep animals where they belong." Peterson nodded thoughtfully, taking detailed notes about everything I was showing him. "But Miss Doyle says there were no warning signs posted to alert people about the electrical system," he pointed out, which was clearly one of her main complaints about the whole situation. "Because warning signs aren't required by law for wildlife deterrent systems that are properly installed on private property," I replied. "But look, let me show you something that might give you a completely different perspective on what actually happened here, and why Miss Doyle was really on my property in the first place." I pulled up my security camera footage on my phone, feeling confident that video evidence would speak louder than any creative storytelling could. "This might help clarify the real situation," I said, queuing up the relevant footage from that morning's incident. Peterson watched the footage without saying a single word, but I could see his expression changing as the true story unfolded on my phone screen. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the shift, the kind of silence that signals gears turning in someone's head. First, there was Cynthia's golf cart pulling up to my property with obvious intent and familiarity. Then the charging cable being deliberately plugged into my outlet like she'd done it many times before. The careful concealment of the cable behind bushes and around fence posts to hide what she was doing. When the footage got to the moment of the electrical pulse and Cynthia's shocked reaction, Peterson's eyebrows went up slightly in what looked like recognition or understanding. "So she was attempting to use your electricity to charge her golf cart without permission?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "For the third time, actually," I confirmed. "I left a polite note after the first incident asking her to stop, which you can clearly see her read and discard in the video like it was completely meaningless to her." Peterson was quiet for a long moment, rewatching Cynthia's reaction on the screen. The confusion, the anger, the frantic looking around to see if anyone had witnessed her embarrassment and failure to steal my electricity successfully. What would you do in my position? Trust that the truth and evidence would be enough to resolve this fairly? Or start preparing for an even bigger fight with someone who'd already proven they were willing to lie and manipulate to get what they wanted? Still, the man had a poker face so unreadable he could have been bluffing with a pair of threes or holding a royal flush. Peterson's poker face gave absolutely nothing away as he closed his notebook and said goodbye, leaving me completely uncertain about which way this whole situation was going to go. I couldn't tell if I'd just saved myself from HOA hell by providing clear evidence of what really happened, or if I'd somehow dug my own grave even deeper by getting involved in a conflict with someone who had more influence in the community than I realized. The email from the HOA board came 2 days later, and I'll admit I was genuinely nervous about opening it, because I had no idea which way Peterson had decided to go with his recommendation. The message was short, professional, and to the point. After reviewing the incident report, video evidence, and applicable regulations, the board finds no violation of HOA covenants or local ordinances. Mr. Harper's wildlife deterrent system is properly installed within his property boundaries and meets all legal compliance requirements. However, we recommend posting a small courtesy sign near the electrical outlet to inform service workers and visitors of the system's presence. That was it. No drama, no punishment, no demands to remove my system or pay for Cynthia's imaginary medical expenses. Just a simple factual acknowledgement that I'd done nothing wrong and a perfectly reasonable suggestion for a warning sign. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me, like I'd been holding my breath for days without realizing it. I actually laughed out loud, one of those sharp, surprised barks of relief you only make after holding your breath for days without realizing it. The system had actually worked the way it was supposed to. Truth and evidence had won out over lies and manipulation, at least in this particular battle. For about 5 minutes, I actually thought this whole nightmare was finally over and I could go back to living my quiet life. But peace, I was about to learn, is sometimes just the intermission before Act 2. But if I thought Cynthia Doyle would just accept defeat gracefully and move on with her life like a reasonable adult, I was dead wrong about her character and her capacity for holding grudges. Within a week of the HOA board's decision, I started noticing subtle changes in how some of my neighbors interacted with me that made me wonder if something else was going on behind the scenes. Nothing dramatic or obvious that I could point to as evidence of a problem, just a slight coolness in conversations that used to be warm and friendly. It wasn't outright hostility, just enough cold shoulders and polite smiles to feel like I'd stepped into someone else's party uninvited. Interactions that felt shorter and more stilted than they had been before this whole mess started. Then I happened to overhear a neighbor from 3 houses down talking to her friend by the community mailbox, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. "I just think it's irresponsible to have dangerous electrical equipment all over his property like that," she was saying in a concerned tone. "No warning signs until the HOA practically forced him to put them up? What if a child had wandered over there and gotten seriously hurt?" That's when I realized exactly what was happening and how Cynthia had decided to fight back after losing the official battle with the HOA board. She couldn't beat me through legitimate channels, so she'd decided to wage a guerrilla PR war instead, spreading her carefully edited version of events through the neighborhood gossip network, one strategic conversation at a time. Her story slithered through the neighborhood, smooth as gossip and twice as sticky. The brilliant thing about her approach, from a purely tactical standpoint, was how subtle and believable her campaign was to people who didn't know the full story. She was talking about the electrical shock and the potential danger to community members, while completely omitting the theft, the trespassing, the multiple warnings she'd ignored, and the fact that she'd been stealing my electricity when the incident occurred. About a week into Cynthia's whisper campaign against my reputation, I learned something that put her entire behavior pattern in a completely different light and helped me understand what had really been motivating her from the very beginning. I was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a client installation when I bumped into a landscaper who does work around our community. We got to talking about various neighbors and community happenings, and somehow Cynthia's name came up in the conversation. "Oh yeah, the Doyles," he said, shaking his head with what looked like genuine sympathy. "Nice enough people overall, but they're really struggling financially these days from what I can tell. Mrs. Doyle asked me last month if I knew anyone selling used outdoor extension cords cheap because she said they were trying to cut their electric bill any way they could manage." That comment hit me like a puzzle piece clicking into place, suddenly making sense of behavior that had seemed purely malicious before. Then it all clicked into focus. This wasn't just about entitlement or principle or some kind of power struggle between neighbors. Cynthia was genuinely trying to save money on her electricity costs by charging her golf cart using other people's power, probably calculating that a few dollars here and there from different outlets around the community would add up to meaningful savings over time. Later that same week, another neighbor mentioned seeing Cynthia collecting old cables and electrical wire from the community recycling area, where people left items they didn't want anymore. It sounded like quiet desperation from people who were trying to make ends meet in a retirement that wasn't going as smoothly as they'd planned. Learning about their genuine financial struggles made me feel honestly pretty conflicted about the whole situation and how I'd handled it. I hated how it made me feel. A blend of reluctant sympathy and growing resentment, like someone tugging at your conscience with dirty hands. On one hand, I genuinely understood desperation and the stress of trying to make your budget work when every dollar matters more than it used to. On the other hand, being broke still doesn't give anyone the right to steal from their neighbors without asking permission first. And, more importantly, if she'd just approached me honestly and asked if she could occasionally use my outlet to charge her golf cart, I probably would have said yes most of the time, because I'm not unreasonable about helping neighbors when they need it. But the way she'd handled everything after that first incident, the sneaking around, the lies to the HOA board, the reputation destruction campaign she was running against me afterward, that wasn't desperation talking anymore. That was just bad character and a willingness to hurt other people rather than accept responsibility for her own choices and behavior. I could understand and even forgive the first incident, maybe even the second one if she'd been truly desperate, but everything that came after that was pure manipulation and vindictiveness from someone who couldn't handle being told no. Had she asked for help, I probably would have said yes, but she hadn't asked, she'd taken. For the next 2 weeks, everything seemed quiet around my little corner of the community, and I started to think that maybe Cynthia had finally moved on to other concerns or found different ways to solve her financial problems. Maybe too quiet, if I'm being honest about the warning signs I should have recognized. I should have known from experience that when someone like Cynthia stops making obvious noise and causing visible problems, it usually means they're busy making plans behind the scenes. Plans that I definitely wasn't going to like when I finally discovered what she'd been working on. And when people like Cynthia go quiet, you should always start worrying. The complaint started innocently enough with the neighbor who lives 2 houses down from me and had always been one of the friendlier people in our little community. "Nate, I hate to bother you with this, but since you set up that fence, our Wi-Fi's gone gremlin," she said when she approached me while I was checking my mail. "The connection keeps dropping out at random times throughout the day, and my husband's working from home now, so it's becoming a real problem for his video conferences and client calls." That struck me as genuinely odd because wildlife deterrent systems operate on completely different radio frequencies than Wi-Fi networks, engineered to avoid interference, period. But I told her I'd definitely look into it and see if there was some kind of unexpected interaction between my system and her internet equipment. Then came another neighbor the next day with a similar but different complaint. "Hey Nate, my garage door opener has been going absolutely crazy lately. It opens and closes by itself sometimes, usually in the evening when we're trying to watch TV. My wife thinks our house is haunted now, but I'm wondering if it might be some kind of electrical interference from your setup over there. Was it possible I was missing something, or was I just being gaslit by a golf cart mafia?" Then a neighbor from the corner house showed up at my door. Our baby monitor sounds like a dying fax machine half the night. It's driving us absolutely nuts because we can't get a good night's sleep, and the timing seems to coincide with when your electrical system is running. Within 2 weeks, I had 6 different neighbors approaching me about various forms of electrical interference, supposedly caused by my property, and the complaints were all remarkably similar in their vagueness but frustratingly specific in their accusations. Random electronic glitches, intermittent signal problems, devices acting weird at seemingly unpredictable times, but all pointing back to my wildlife deterrent system as the common culprit. Here's the thing that was driving me absolutely crazy about these complaints. I know electrical systems inside and out because I've been working with them professionally for 15 years. A low-voltage deer fence, operating at the frequencies and power levels I was using, simply cannot and does not cause the kind of widespread electronic interference these people were describing to me. The physics just doesn't work that way, and I'd installed hundreds of these systems for clients without ever receiving a single complaint about electronic interference with household devices. I spent an entire weekend testing my equipment with a borrowed signal analyzer from a buddy in the electrical business, running every diagnostic I could think of to see if there was some problem I'd missed. Everything came back completely clean, no electromagnetic interference, no signal bleeding, no frequency conflicts, nothing that could possibly affect Wi-Fi routers, garage door openers, baby monitors, or any other common electronic devices. But the complaints kept coming anyway, and they were getting more specific and more angry as time went on. Either I'd become the HOA's Frankenstein, or someone was framing me with surgical precision. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind or if maybe there was some other explanation I wasn't seeing because I was too close to the situation to think clearly about it. The worst part was how these complaints were systematically destroying my reputation in the community, turning me from a quiet, helpful neighbor into the guy whose dangerous electrical equipment was making everyone's life miserable. I was starting to feel genuinely paranoid, like there was some kind of conspiracy against me that I couldn't quite see or understand. That's when I decided to really dig deep into my security footage and analyze everything that had happened over the past month, not just the obvious incidents around my electrical outlet. I started looking at every camera angle, every timestamp, searching for patterns or connections that might explain the timing of these electronic problems that everyone was blaming on my equipment. And that's when I found what I can only describe as the smoking gun that changed everything I thought I understood about this situation. 3 weeks earlier, buried in routine footage that I'd never had any reason to examine closely, there was a recording of Cynthia talking to a young guy I'd never seen before in our community. Baseball cap, backpack, looked like a college student or recent graduate who was probably doing some kind of work around the neighborhood. Something about the way he moved, quick, deliberate, set off alarms I didn't know I had. 2 days later, the same unknown guy appeared in different footage, this time near a neighbor's house, and he definitely wasn't just walking by casually like someone might if they were visiting another neighbor or delivering something. The security footage clearly showed him crouched down by outdoor Wi-Fi equipment, obviously doing something with his hands for several minutes while looking around to make sure nobody was watching him work. I kept scrolling through weeks of footage with growing disbelief and anger, as the pattern became undeniable. There he was again, near another neighbor's garage, messing with what looked like some kind of small electronic device that he was placing or adjusting near the garage door mechanism. And again at another house, doing something suspicious near their electrical meter and outdoor equipment connections. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestration. Son of a bitch, I said out loud to my empty house as the full scope of what I was seeing finally hit me. She's not just spreading rumors about me, she's actually sabotaging people's electronics and then blaming the problems on my electrical system. This wasn't just a series of random neighbor complaints about legitimate electronic interference. This was a coordinated campaign of sabotage and misdirection designed to destroy my reputation and turn the entire community against me through false evidence and manufactured problems. Cynthia had somehow recruited this kid, probably paid him with money she didn't really have to spare, to plant signal jammers or interference devices around the neighborhood, creating just enough electronic chaos to cause annoying but believable glitches that could plausibly be blamed on my wildlife deterrent system. The genius of her scheme was the plausibility factor that made it almost impossible to defend against, without sounding like a paranoid conspiracy theorist. Most people don't understand how electrical interference actually works, So if their Wi-Fi starts acting up around the same time their neighbor installs an electric fence, the connection seems obvious and logical to them. Sitting there with undeniable proof of Cynthia's elaborate scheme spread across my computer screen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: real power and control over my own situation. The question was no longer whether I could prove my innocence or defend myself against false accusations. The question was whether I was ready to completely destroy her reputation the way she'd been systematically trying to destroy mine. Cynthia wasn't just lying, she was engineering a narrative, one sabotage signal at a time. I spent the next few days building what I knew had to be an absolutely bulletproof case against Cynthia, because I understood that I was only going to get one chance to expose her scheme before she found ways to cover her tracks or discredit my evidence. The security footage of Cynthia meeting with her young accomplice by the community mailbox, multiple videos of him systematically placing suspicious devices near the exact houses that had complained about electronic interference, and timestamps that matched perfectly with when each neighbor's problems had started occurring. I didn't just want to clear my name, I wanted the truth to knock the smug off her face. I called in a favor from my buddy Marcus, who does RF analysis and signal testing for telecommunications companies and has access to professional-grade equipment that can detect electronic interference patterns with scientific precision. Marcus didn't ask questions. He showed up with enough gear to scan a satellite. He came out to my property with a full-spectrum analyzer set up and confirmed what I already knew from my own testing. My deer fence system was producing absolutely zero measurable interference with any common household electronics. More importantly, his professional equipment picked up several small illegal signal jammers placed strategically around the neighborhood. Cheap devices designed specifically to disrupt Wi-Fi networks, garage door openers, and other common electronic devices. Instead of confronting individual neighbors one at a time, or trying to clear my name through a series of private conversations, I decided to go nuclear with a strategy that would force everyone to confront the truth simultaneously. I requested an emergency community-wide meeting through the HOA board, which was something I'd never done before. Peterson was initially reluctant because these meetings were usually reserved for serious community issues, but when I told him I had concrete evidence of illegal electronic devices being planted around the neighborhood by a community resident, he agreed to schedule the meeting immediately. The meeting was packed, with probably the biggest turnout for an HOA gathering in years, with people standing along the walls because there weren't enough folding chairs for everyone who showed up. I could feel the tension in the room as people looked at me with mixtures of curiosity, suspicion, and annoyance, probably expecting me to make excuses for problems that they believed I'd caused with my electrical equipment. I started my presentation simple and direct. Let's stop guessing. I'll show you exactly what's been happening on your properties, on video. The room fell completely silent as I connected my laptop to the community projector and started playing the security footage that would change everything everyone thought they knew about recent events. Silence? Good. Now play. First, the footage of Cynthia meeting with the unidentified young man by the mailbox, their intense conversation, and his subsequent departure. Then the same man systematically visiting houses around the community over several days, placing small electronic devices near Wi-Fi equipment, electrical meters, and garage door receivers, with obvious intent to cause problems. When I showed the footage of him crouched by outdoor Wi-Fi equipment, the affected neighbor audibly gasped and pointed at the screen with recognition. "That's exactly when my internet started acting up," she exclaimed, "right after that day when I saw someone working near my house but didn't think anything of it." In the corner, Cynthia stiffened. Her fingers clenched so tight her knuckles bleached white. The room started buzzing with conversation as people began connecting their own experiences with the evidence they were seeing on the screen, realizing that their electronic problems had very specific, deliberate causes that had nothing to do with my electrical system. But the moment that sealed Cynthia's fate and turned the entire community against her was when Tom Bradley, who lives near the community entrance and tends to notice everything that happens around here, suddenly stood up during my presentation with obvious excitement and anger. "That's him! I saw that punk under my porch last week. Look what I found stuck there," he announced, his voice getting louder as he realized the significance of what he was remembering. He pulled out his phone and showed everyone a picture of a signal jammer identical to the devices Marcus had detected, providing independent confirmation that completely validated everything I'd been saying. It was like I'd kicked a hornet's nest of disbelief and fury. Everyone started talking at once, sharing their own stories about seeing the mysterious young man around their properties and finding suspicious devices. People were pulling out their phones, showing pictures of electronic equipment they'd found in strange places, comparing notes about when their problems had started. Gasps, murmurs, everyone was now on the same page, and Cynthia was on the wrong one. And through it all, Cynthia sat in the back row of folding chairs, visibly shrinking smaller and smaller with each revelation as her elaborate scheme unraveled in front of the entire community. When Peterson finally managed to call for order, he looked directly at Cynthia with the kind of disappointed expression that only a former teacher could master. "Ms. Doyle," he said in a voice that carried across the entire room, "do you have anything you'd like to say about these allegations and the evidence we've all just witnessed?" Cynthia's face went through about 6 different emotions in 5 seconds. Denial, anger, defiance, fear, desperate calculation, and finally complete defeat, as she realized that there was no way to talk her way out of what everyone had seen with their own eyes. I don't know what you're talking about," she said in a shaky voice that convinced absolutely no one and only made her look more guilty and pathetic. The damage was completely done at that point, and everyone in that room now knew exactly what kind of person they'd been dealing with, and exactly how far she was willing to go to get revenge on a neighbor who dared to stand up to her entitled behavior. Peterson didn't need to hand down any dramatic punishment or issue official sanctions through the HOA board, because the community had heard all the evidence and reached their own conclusions about Cynthia Doyle's character and trustworthiness. Over the following week, she found herself increasingly isolated from neighborhood social activities as people stopped including her in book clubs, coffee mornings, and the informal gatherings that make community life enjoyable. Her opinions at HOA meetings were politely acknowledged and then completely ignored, and while she wasn't formally shunned, her credibility and social standing in the community were completely finished. The young man she'd hired to plant the interference devices apparently disappeared immediately after Tom Bradley's revelation, probably realizing that he could face serious legal consequences for placing illegal electronic devices on other people's property. As for the interference devices themselves, Marcus and I spent a Saturday morning systematically locating and removing all of them with his RF detection equipment. Suddenly, as if by magic, everyone's Wi-Fi started working perfectly again. Garage doors stopped opening randomly, and baby monitors went back to monitoring babies instead of broadcasting static. A month later, I was working peacefully in my garden when I heard the familiar sound of a golf cart approaching my property. For just a split second, my old defensive reflexes kicked in, but it wasn't Cynthia or anyone looking for trouble. It was my neighbor, bringing me a plate of homemade cookies and a sincere apology for doubting my character and blaming me for problems I hadn't caused. "I should have known you weren't the type to cause problems for your neighbors," she said, looking embarrassed. "You've always been such a considerate person. Cynthia still lives in the community. We nod when we pass on the walking paths. But now there's a quiet understanding about boundaries. She knows what I know about her, and she knows I'm not someone to push. I've learned the best way to deal with a bully isn't to argue or hope they change. It's to stay quiet, gather proof, and wait. I didn't win by yelling. I won by noticing. Present the facts, stay calm, let the truth land. And the best part? My electric bill dropped. When someone stops stealing power 3 times a week, it adds up. Turns out, holding your ground pays off. And that's how a golf cart, a deer fence, and one very entitled neighbor turned my quiet life into a slow burn showdown. If you've ever had to deal with someone like Cynthia or handled a petty HOA mess of your own, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments, and if this one made you grin, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and stick around. This is QA Stories, where the quiet ones don't just get even, they get efficient.
Thanks for watching QA Stories. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more wild tales coming your way.